Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our premiere edition of The Inside Job. Today, I am fortunate enough to have my very first guest, Daniel Stott. Hopefully, I'm saying your name correct. And you are, that laugh tells me I'm not. And you are the Director of Customer Success at Elder HQ and have been with the company since nearly its inception in 2015. Thank you so much for coming. I know how busy your schedule is. Everything is virtual now. And, as I mentioned before, for someone that works remotely, a lot of times you end up working even harder and doing more work than if you were in a public office space. So really appreciate you taking the time out for chatting with me today.
Not a worry at all. You're more than welcome. And you almost got the name correct. It was almost. It's Stott, but it was so close.
What is it?
It's Stott.
Stott.
Yeah.
What is the origin of your last name?
I think it's, to be honest with you, I'm not massively sure, but I think it might be Scottish. Which ironically, when I lived in the States, that's where most people thought I was from, because I don't sound like the Queen. So if you don't sound like the Queen, you're probably not from England. So it was, Scotland or Ireland or Australia.
No, it's funny because my husband, he's from Scotland, and everyone thinks he's from South Africa or Australia, and he's been in England. They moved here from Scotland since he was about 3 or 4 years old, but for some reason he doesn't have that perfect English accent. And I think as an American myself, we just assume that everyone sounds like the Queen.
I know. I sometimes if I was struggling with a particular pronunciation of a word, I would just go straight for the poshest accent I could put on, like the Hugh Grant accent, and it would just cut like a knife through butter. It was great. It always worked. People understood it. It helped.
I think you sound a little bit Irish.
Yeah, I get that. I used to have quite a big beard as well, and it was very red, and I would get Conor McGregor quite a lot. So,
yeah. Well, first off, as I mentioned earlier, you are the Customer Success Director of Customer Success. I've been hearing that title a little bit more recently, and can you explain to me what exactly that means? What does a customer success professional, what does that entail?
Sure. So also it's a relatively new term. I only recognize seeing it around the last 4 or 5 years. For a lot of companies, customer success is the onboarding of a new customer and then retention of that customer. For us at Elder, it is a little bit different. So for us, it includes sales as well. So within my customer success department, we have the whole sales team. So from junior sales associates through to senior sales associates and sales managers. And then the handover of our service happens to the customer experience team, who look after the account management side of things, and all of that falls under customer success. So effectively, the responsibility of my team is to get as many new customers through the door as possible, and then retain as many as we possibly can.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, because I like customer success. Are you dealing with the clients and making them happy? Or are you dealing with the sales team and making them happy? Or is it a combination of both? So it seems like you do a little bit of everything there.
Yeah, I was the head of sales. I've always been in sales background, and I was head of sales. And then what we found was, because we were handing over from sales into operations, and the customer was getting kind of a variable experience. It wasn't really consistent. So we made a change in January, and I took over the whole department to make sure that every single person right across the front line was delivering a consistent customer experience. So what often happens happens with between sales and operations, you know, going way back when, is the old hot potato, throwing things across from sales into ops, and there being friction between the two teams. But ultimately, if I'm responsible for the whole thing, then there is no friction necessarily there. It's just whatever works best for the customer and works best for us. And then we go that way. So there's never a, you know, he said, she said, which can can happen quite often with sales and ops.
Okay. Now, I've been watching, following Elder HQ just most recently, and I see that your company is actually growing in business. And in a time where you have other companies, they're either going out of business, they're laying off most of their employees, or, you know, being furloughed. How is it that Elder HQ is able to, for lack of a better word, thrive in such trying times?
So it's a good question. I think one of the things that we're benefiting from is the fact that we were set up, we're a tech-enabled company. So, you know, started 4 years ago, but with a very, very, very tech-driven culture. So our CTO, who actually arrived on the scene before I did, so almost right at the beginning, came from Google. And, you know, ever since then, and obviously my background being at Just Eat, another tech company, so we were very much around making sure that we were tech enabled. So when this all happened and everybody had to work remote, because we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that our technology was good enough and we could all work 24 hours a day if we really wanted to, when we all had to go home, business was kind of as usual. We just had to adapt the way that we do our one-to-ones and our meetings. But other than that, all of our services could continue uninterrupted by the pandemic. And then obviously, you know, on the flip side of that, a lot of our competitors and our in the care sector across the landscape, they are not as tech enabled. Quite a few of them have been around for quite a long time. So it's a lot more difficult and challenging for them to go working remote when it's not something that they've ever really anticipated doing. So that kind of gives us a bit of a, I guess a bit of a lead in that regard. And, you know, ultimately, I think given the current circumstances that we're going through, the safest place for a person to be, for an elderly person, is to be at home with as few visitors as possible, which is exactly what we offer, versus our competitors in different type of industries where there's lots of elderly people together in like a care home setting, or where they're being visited by lots of people regularly, like domiciliary care. Those two competitive landscapes that we have are now really challenging for those providers. So we kind of fit into a niche that is actually really safe. And because of the way that we started with our tech backgrounds, it means that we've not had any slowing of our service. So we're able to get and reach as many families as we possibly can during this time.
And that's definitely true, because my sister, she's back in New York. She had to teach all of her staff, her peers, how to do online courses, because she was doing it for quite some time, and it's something she incorporated because she had children, and now everyone had to do it. And she was just telling me how much work it was having an emergency meeting with the faculty, staff, and training them. So being technology savvy, that's definitely an advantage. And, you know, kind of shifting it to something a little bit lighter, I see that you are a former professional football player. And evidently, you were successful in bridging the gap between the world of sports and the corporate culture. What skills do you feel that you had while being a professional football player that not only made you successful on the field, but transferred over to the corporate culture?
I think having a sporting background, there's a ton of different things, and I think any company that is doing some hiring, and there's a lot of amazing professional athletes that don't quite make the grade, or they exit in their early 20s or in their late teens, and a lot of the skills that you pick up playing sports are around teamwork, especially if it's a team related sport, and working collaboratively to get to a shared goal is something that the vast majority of companies are, you know, that's kind of the philosophy that they have. So very easy for someone who's got a team-based sporting background to just fit straight into a company that has like a shared goal where everyone's working towards in one particular direction. And then I also think as well as even if it's an individual sport or a team sport, the competitive edge and the desire to be better than others in your field. When you put that into going into the world of work, I didn't have to think twice about being motivated or wanting to be the best at what I did. It was just natural through playing sports that I came into it, and I would work harder than everyone else when I first started my career, not because I had like a goal that I was necessarily trying to achieve. It was more that it was just part and parcel of who I was, because being a professional athlete, you just have to have that hunger inside if you want to really make the grade. And I'd say they're the two things. So competitive edge, and then being able to work collaboratively in a team, I would say.
That's true. I worked with a few athletes in my sales career, and they were very disciplined, always on time. In fact, early, and super competitive. But they were also team spirited, but they were very competitive. And they were really successful in sales as a result, just like you're saying. And so slightly just off topic, we're still on the subject of football. My husband eats and drinks football. And he was a fan of your old football team, the Bolton Wanderers. He wants to know, did you ever get the opportunity, got to make sure I get the name right, to play with Nicholas Anelka, and if so, what was it like?
I did. I was fortunate to be in the same dressing room. Obviously, at the time, I was in the reserve team, and Mr. Anelka, Nick, he was in the first team. But I guess we sort of like shared dressing rooms, and we had a bit of pre-season, and we trained together. He was phenomenal. He was quite the character. I think at the time, Bolton had quite a lot of French-speaking players, either from African countries or from France itself. So there was quite quite a few of the players that would often speak French. And so I think he felt quite at home in that sense. But he was very, very talented. And I think his persona off the field, I guess, was quite distant and, maybe not as warm and as friendly. But certainly off the field, he was great to chat to. He also had quite a lot of really good stories because he played for some of the world's most phenomenal football clubs. So, it was great. I was very, very fortunate to be part of Bolton at that time, where they had so many absolute rock stars that played that I was enough to play alongside.
Yeah, I know, because he's like, which year did he play? What years? And he's like, oh my God, you have to ask him about Nicholas. I'm like, who? He was just asked. He'll know who you're talking about. Yeah, he's very big on that. And another thing that I liked about your resume was, your diversity. Aside from the UK, I see that you've worked in America, Brazil, Australia. As an individual that just migrated to the US last year, and I'm still getting acclimated, what professional advice would you give to someone like me just joining the UK workforce?
It's a really good question, actually. I'd say there's a lot of traits that people need in all markets that I've had experience in working in, but then there are others that are very unique to Britain or to the UK. So without going into the generalized ones, because we all know what most of those are, the specific ones in the UK are around. So when you're in certain markets, you can be very direct and you can be straight to the point, and that works more so in, let's just say you're in New York, for example, where like time is limited and you just need to say what you have to say and kind of get it back. In the UK, you almost want to, before you go in heavy and before you go in direct, there's always that element of British culture where you soften things a little bit, then you deliver a hard message, and then you sort of, not to sugarcoat things, but ultimately there's that level of, I guess there's a level of pleasantries that are just that just always observed before a meeting, before a difficult conversation. Whereas in other markets that I've worked in, I'll have been working in a place and they'll just say like, why have we spent the last 45 seconds or so being nice to each other when you're about to like absolutely attack me for something? And that's just because in British culture, there is just being that warm and offering those pleasantries first. That would be one thing. That's more like cultural. But then what I would say in the UK versus other markets, I think there's like working hard is important. That's important in a lot of places. But I think working smart is really, really important in the UK. There's a level of emotional intelligence that's required in the vast majority of roles, especially in anything to do with business development or account management. And I think having that emotional intelligence means that you're able to get a lot more from a lot less. So when you're speaking to people, if you're aware about yourself and you're aware about the other individual, you can kind of create a rapport based on that. And that ties back into that pleasantries bit, which is rapport building is really, really important. And in a lot of other markets that I've worked in, rapport isn't necessarily a prerequisite to a deal. Quite often the numbers might speak for themselves, but I think in the UK people still buy from people, very much so. You couldn't just send a demo that did all the talking itself and expect someone to just make an order. They're very, very much about that personal touch and building rapport.
So relationship building, it's very important.
Yeah, I'd say the markets that there's so many polarizing markets out there. I remember going to when I ran the sales team out in Australia, and they were almost 100% rapport. I'd go out and I'd watch sales calls where actually the content of the sales pitch was disastrous. The numbers might have not been correct, it might have not been personalized, but the rapport was so strong. The business owner just made a decision, and that's Aussie was like, that was the way. And then in the UK, we're like halfway between, where rapport is really important, but also you need to get your numbers right and you need to sort of nail the other bits. Then you go across to like the US or other, where it's like, you just got to get the number, you just got to get the data and the information right. You can be the nicest person in the world, but if I'm not seeing what I need to see, then this isn't going to happen. So I think the UK market's like nicely in the middle of those.
Okay. And what's the one life lesson that has taken you the longest to learn?
Ooh. And I'm still very much learning, but I would say self-awareness. Self-awareness is something that I'm still mastering. I think everyone's still mastering, to be honest, unless you've spent 50 years in a monastery being a monk and being fully understanding of your own self and how you show up in the world. I think for me, going through that journey has really helped me with leading teams, because when I was in my younger days and I wasn't as self-aware and I wasn't really fully knowledgeable about my impact on others and my words and my actions and where that was coming from internally and what I was projecting externally and how that had an effect on people. In my early management days, someone might have said I wore my heart on my sleeve, which is basically kind of like a code word for just being very volatile emotionally, because you're processing and then you're externalizing. And I think as the years have gone on, and I've worked a lot more on my self-awareness, so being understanding of how my own emotions are happening inside, and then making a decision based on that, and then making sure that whatever I externalized, I'd gone through the thought process and made sure that the impact that I had on people around me was a positive one. And I'm still working on it, by the way. I'm nowhere near perfected.
Sorry, go ahead. Do you find that, I mean, this is definitely the case for me. Do you find that as you get older, you're more confident in the decisions that you make, whether or not it's popular with everyone else? Are you more certain of yourself and your decisions as you get older, or do you find that you seek validation from others?
A little bit more confident in my decision making when it comes to things that I've sort of experienced before, I think one of the things that's interesting about the role I'm doing now, a lot of the decisions that we're making are new and haven't been done before, because we're sort of pioneering in our space a little bit. And, you know, I'm not necessarily picking things out of a textbook and putting them into practice. I'm changing the way things are. And when you've not really got any blueprint to follow, you have to be confident. But at the same time, I constantly ask for feedback from people around me. And that doesn't matter what level, whether they're my peers or whether they're people in my team. I think seeking not necessarily validation, but seeking feedback so we can, I think that's the one thing I've learned more than anything at Elder, not being too attached to your own thoughts and seeing them come to fruition. The minute you start doing that, you start ignoring good advice. So I'll always put an idea out, and then I'll test it on a few people, see what they think, and then I'll iterate, and hopefully together we can come up with a better solution. I'm sort of, my staple in interview, what I'm always telling people is, if I'm supposed to be the one that has all the answers, then we're goosed as a company. It's very much about everyone else having their opinion, chipping in, giving me feedback, and we sort of learn and we grow together, rather than it being, hey, Dan's got an idea, he's going to roll it out and we're going to see how it goes. It's usually like a collective effort.
In 15 seconds or less, tell me what the biggest takeaway from this meeting should be.
I would say definitely regarding working incredibly hard, understanding what rapport means, understanding emotional intelligence, and then also, I suppose, when you're hiring in the future, knowing what type of traits you want to look for, and certainly give ex-professional athletes a chance if you can.
Well, thank you so much again, Daniel, for taking the time to sit with me. And I want to salute you as well as the people at Elder HQ for taking care of the most vulnerable people, the seniors in society. And everyone out there, stay inside and stay safe. And thank you again.